Welcome once again to Voice of the Non-Nation. I am your host, JPN, and joining me today is myself and I. It's just me here today. Jip is occupied, but we're still going to push on, and we're still going to have an episode here this week. We want to keep you up to date on all the latest happenings, both macroeconomically in the Ethereum's verse, as well as what's happening in the non-nation. So this week, it's just me, but I want to give you some of my thoughts on the happenings of the week. Two big things I sort of want to focus on. One's macro. The FOMC meeting was this last week. And oh boy, we got a rate hike, and potentially the last one. The language seems to have been changed in their after meeting speech. So this is potentially the last rate hike that we're going to see, which is kind of interesting. And then the other topic we're going to talk about here is the NONnation Treasury split that happened this week. Sort of what that was, what happened during it, and why it's one of the more powerful features within the non-nation, something that's already up and working, that could already make huge splashes in the Ethereum ecosystem. So first and foremost, we're going to talk mostly this first part about the FOMC meeting. Jerome Powell came out and we got another 25 bips increase, which is rather small. It seems to be sort of potentially the last one that we're going to see. There was a press release afterward, and the press release seemed to indicate that this is either going to be the last one, or we're not going to see many large increases moving forward. This is an old graph. A version of this was going around Twitter. I think this is an older version of it, but this is showing the blue line is showing the Fed rate over time. I think the yellow line's the S&P 500, the S&P index. So one interesting thing to note is the 5.25% interest rate that we currently have, that it got raised to at this last meeting, is the same rate we had 2006, 2007, right before the subprime mortgage crisis in 2008. And this chart sort of made the rounds. And the reason I thought this was really interesting is mostly you can see the history of the hike. So you have, over time, fairly rapid, but a little bit slower hikes up, staying at some increased interest rate for some amount of time, and then sharp drop-offs, which are actually sharper than the increase in rates. They tend to drop off very fast. And the last two times this happened were 2008, the subprime mortgage crisis, where we dipped tremendously, very, very fast, and the interest rates went basically to zero. This happened again, where we had slow rise in interest rates through 2016, 17, 18, to some sort of peak when COVID happened. And at that point, rates got cut again very, very rapidly and got sent back to zero. We find ourselves in a similar situation now. We've been increasing rates, and we've actually been increasing rates faster than these previous two cycles. But it seems like if we're at the peak interest rate, we are going to hold that for some amount of time. These last ones, this was something about a year. This was a couple of months pre-COVID. So it seems like there's potential, if history repeats, we're going to hold this rate for either months to a year or so. And then we're going to see a dramatic cutting of rates when things start to break. And again, in 2008, things broke with the subprime crisis. In 2020, things broke with COVID. What's going to break this time is sort of the question on everyone's mind. And one of the big things it looks like it might be is the banks. Currently, here in the US at least, we have a lot of smaller regional banks that are collapsing. One just got sold to JP Morgan this last week since the last podcast, and several others declined pretty sharply yesterday after the rate hike announcement. So it seems to me that if things were to break this time, it's these regional banks, the banks that aren't too big to fail, going through some sort of crisis as they weren't expecting this fast of rate hikes. Their books weren't built for these rapid rate hikes at this point. They sort of expected, a long time of near zero rates and then a slow rise. But because of the money printing that happened post COVID, we had inflation, and now the Fed is trying to aggressively fight inflation. And Powell said as much during his speech that their key thing that they wanted to fight is inflation, and that they think that the banking contagion's under control, although the bank stocks tend to disagree. So it'll be interesting this time. How long are we going to have those higher rates? And what is going to break this time? In the past, things have broken, and we're going to see if something's going to go ahead and break this time. So if you have any ideas, any thoughts on the matter, leave a comment down in the video description. Let us know what you think is going to happen. How long are we going to see these increased rates? Are they going to be long enough? Are the banks going to be tough enough to hold it out? So that's my thought on the macro situation, on the rate hikes here. Let me know if you agree, if you think the banks can hold out for months, or if you think that come middle end of the summer, if enough things have broken, that we're going to have rate cuts again and have quantitative easing come back. So it's going to be interesting to see how macro plays out over the coming months. But one thing that we got to see play out this past week was the Treasury split for the NONnation. This is for everyone who's joining us maybe for the first time or doesn't know what this is. The Treasury split is a quarterly event for the NONnation. And it works according to this infographic. It's a little old and outdated, but OS is now going to be soon, and it'll in the future be the non-token. So, but the model is going to stay the same. So this is the entire economics for the ecosystem, and the key part I want to focus on here is this Treasury splitter. If you were here the other week, we talked a little bit about this, but I want to go in more detail on why this is so powerful later on. So I want to make sure everyone has a good grasp of what we're talking about here. The Treasury splitter is a smart contract within the NONnation for our particular entity. And this hosts funds throughout the quarter. Mostly the funds come from the inflation of the token. So the token gets minted. Some is sold to farming. Some is just given to farming as the tokens. The rest is sold to the Uniswap pool for ETH. And that ETH some of it goes to the team's private treasury. And the rest, a majority of that 45%, comes down to the treasury splitter. The treasury splitter also gets funds from the fee-based business model, both on L1 and L2. And so that means any factory of factory fees, farming fees, routine fees. If they're in ETH, they are going to get sent to the treasury splitter here. We also have a weekly token sale from our investment fund. We'll get to that in a little bit. But the proceeds of that in ETH are also sent to the Treasury splitter. So throughout the quarter, the roughly 3-month period, ETH is sent to this Treasury splitter where it sort of accumulates and waits for something, and that something is the quarterly Treasury split. And the way it works is this is hosted by a module on our entity, and at a particular block height, it enables someone to go through, send a transaction, which takes that ETH that was sitting there and sends it predetermined where we want it to go. In our case, we set it up where 40% of the ETH goes towards delegation grants, 8% goes to the root treasury, ruled by non-holders, 27% goes to the dividends farming, and 25% goes to the investment fund. And that 25% buys the tokens in the investment fund list, as well as OS. The OS, or soon and soon to be non, get burned, while the other tokens, and right now we have ENS, Gitcoin, Rocket Pool ETH, and USDC, go to the investment fund. And in the investment fund, that's where they're getting sold off weekly for ETH and gets put in the Treasury splitter. This sort of gives the NONnation it lets us sort of have the finger on the pulse of the rest of the market. So we won't get left behind if the rest of the market decides to take off here. We have exposure to the wider market and can ride those tokens up as they appreciate. So this Treasury splitter, every 3 months it looks for this transaction, and the really cool thing is this transaction that says, okay, go ahead and take the ETH, split it now, doesn't come from the NONnation core team. It actually comes from a bot on Ethereum, and it can be any bot or any user can trigger this transaction when it's time. And this is really sort of powerful and a interesting point of the things that are happening in our economic model that sort of make it a very powerful thing. The core team does not activate the Treasury splitter. It happens according to only smart contracts in this transaction, which is basically just a trigger. And that doesn't rely on the team at all to happen. It also happens in a couple of other areas, and we'll actually come back to this infographic in a second, but I want to focus on what happened this latest Treasury split, where the money went, and we can sort of track it here. So I'm going to stop sharing here, and I'm going to go to another page and show you the Non-Labs tweeted out what the Treasury split was, and it goes into some of the numbers. So right here, we have 9.1 ETH went to the dividends farming contract, 8.4 ETH went to the investment fund, and show the thread to get into it. 13.5 ETH went to the delegations. And we can actually see all of this happen in real time on ETH. So let me pull up Etherscan here. And we'll actually go through and you can track where the funds go here. So this is the Treasury split transaction. And as you can see, here's the bot that actually triggered the transaction. So the bot that triggered the transaction had no association to the team. This was entirely automatic. And this split was going to happen even if the entire core team from the NONnation was on Mars. It doesn't matter. They were not in control of the funds here. This is purely, smart contracts interacting, sending the ETH where it needed to go. So this is entirely automated, which again is a very powerful system. And you can imagine where this might be useful for things like payroll or anything that you would want to automate on Ethereum. Maybe it's a vesting schedule, etc. all sorts of things could be automated this way, where the control of it is entirely renounced to the contracts and not reliant on the team. But we can follow it here. The 13.5 ETH, this went to the delegations. And we can see here on the internal transactions, the amount came in right down here 2 days and 12 hours ago from the time of this recording. The 13.5 ETH went in, and then it got split up to the different delegations. And right here, the largest one in the split is the non-viral Treasury, Jip and I's delegation that we started. And you can see these are the transactions, his address there. And so this is, you can follow the funds very easily on chain. The other delegations are also represented here. Some of these are, the ciphers, the Ethereum's lab rewards, etc. But those got distributed. We can go back to the main transaction and we can see this 9.1 ETH. This went to the dividends farm. And if we go there and again go to internal transactions, we can see it come in. And then we can see it go out to this contract here. And this would be the dividends farm for this season. You can see people withdrawing liquidity, opening positions as the old farming season ended and the new farming season began. So we can go ahead and track this. The 8.4 ETH, this would have gone to, let me check, this would have gone to the investment fund. So we can go look at that. We track it to the investment fund here. Again, go to the internal transactions. It goes to another contract here. And again, we can look at the internal transactions. And this one, we have to actually go back a little bit. And the reason for that is, again, this happened. And this, the investment fund is also selling the tokens on a weekly basis here. And I think this is actually a more complicated one. I think this is also in charge of inflation. But we can go back here and look at that transaction where we bought the 1.5 Rocket ETH, the almost 3,000 USDC, some ENS, Gitcoin, as well as the Soon. And if you can go down and look at the rest of the transaction, but one thing that's interesting to note is the very last part of this transaction is sending from this fund to the null address, the burn address, the almost 1,000 Soon that got bought back and burned during this treasury split through the investment fund. So you can go through and play with this and check out where all these funds go. And it's very, very easy to track. And it happens entirely on chain. I want to go back one more time to that infographic. I said I'd come back to it. And so we will. It's back here. This mechanism of being able to trigger things through the use of a bot and have the core team be entirely separated from the economic workings is, a level of control being revoked that we don't see in very many, if hardly any, other DAOs in this ecosystem. This is sort of the next stage for where centralized control of a DAO needs turned over to token holders ultimately. And token holders have control over things like what tokens are in the investment fund. They have control over the inflation rate. So these various knobs that can be tuned exist and can be voted on already on chain. But this process of using bots to be able to trigger the transactions automatically away from the team is actually in use in a few other places in the ecosystem already. The two big ones are inflation. So inflation is a process that's happening every day. And right now I think it's about 220 tokens a minute a day. Again, 30% of those are sent to the next season of farming. The rest is sold to the Uniswap pool. And the ETH goes to either the private treasury or the treasury splitter. This is another function that, again, doesn't rely on the core team to trigger. This is not a transaction that Ale or Vasa or any of the other team members is just queuing up once a day. This is a function that has basically a small bounty put on it. Right now, it's a 5% bounty that's put on the transaction. And we say, okay, to anyone, we broadcast this out, anyone on the Ethereum blockchain, if you want to earn 5% of this transaction, trigger this. We'll pay you for that so that it's worthwhile gas wise to have triggered, to make it so that this is going to happen. Right now it's 5%. In the next version, we're actually going to have customizable percentages that can be put in. So 5% was to ensure that whatever was going to happen would trigger in time. And for example, the current version of inflation, I think it's always been, or almost all the time, has been worthwhile to trigger. There's a couple of times at very high gas that it wasn't triggered in the past, just because the 5% reward wasn't enough to pay for gas. But for the most part, this works, assuming reasonable network conditions. So inflation, once a day is getting sold, and it's automatic. This is, again, completely out of the hands of the team. This is something that happens, and once again, holders control this inflation rate. It's not the team. So these mechanisms have been automated. The other place where the mechanisms are automated is in the weekly sale of the tokens, that being ENS and Gitcoin, Rocket Pool ETH, and USDC. Those are getting sold once a week, and that's another one of these automatic transactions. And these were this idea of these automatic transaction was what Covenants was founded on. This was the idea that you could have transactions happen on chain where the person trying to perform these actions didn't have to be associated with a team. It could be anyone. It can be a bot, and you just pay the bot a small fee to go ahead and make sure that these transactions are triggered. And it turns things that would otherwise be a maintenance hassle, like, okay, every week I have to make sure that this is queued up in the right time, or especially like inflation, having to manage once a day sending a transaction would be borderline impossible to have done regularly outside of a system like this. You need to have it be automated. And so if you're listening to this, I encourage you, look at the other DAOs in the space, look at the other organizations, other projects. If they have something that could be automated, push for it to be automated. A lot of things can be automated via this system. You can build these custom transactions using covenants already in the NONnation website. You can build up stuff to send ETH, to do Uniswap swaps, to mint tokens, to burn tokens, etc. That technology is out there and it's available for use, and I would highly encourage other entities within the space to adopt this. This is a very, very powerful thing that has some aspects of the account abstraction that's getting pushed. So that the account abstraction is the idea that rather than have smart contract wallets for individuals be special in some way, that they're just smart contracts like everything else, and that enables them to be automated in certain ways. One of the things people talk about is basically being able to set up recurring payments for a bank, for a loan, for your gas bill, etc. Utility gas bill, not Ethereum gas bill. But to have things, automated in that way. And we're showing with this system, we already have that kind of control with smart contracts in ways that funds are distributed automatically. Token swaps can be handled automatically, mints, burns, transfers. A lot of things can already be automated using this kind of system. So this is a very powerful system, and uh, it works. You can go look at the transaction on Etherscan and be able to track the money flowing in a way that is totally separate from team interaction. It is an amazing part of the system that I think sometimes gets overlooked for the more flashy entities or items or now the bazaar. But this automated moving of funds within an ecosystem in a way where the core team doesn't have the ability to interrupt, to say, oh, we're changing the parameters here, oh, we're not going to do it this way now, we're double dipping. You don't have to worry about any of that. This is automated, repeated, or even just one-off transactions that can occur, and we've been able to show that they don't need to be just simple, transfer ETH transactions either. They can be much more complicated, the swapping tokens on Uniswap. So this is a powerful system. And again, it sometimes overlooked, but this is a key piece towards moving from centralized, even centralized DAOs or centralized control to a fully decentralized economic system with automated transactions that is ruled entirely by token holders. This is a big step, and it's something that the NONnation has been doing for more than a year and a half already. So the technology's out there. We've proved it already, and now we want to get it into the hands of other DAOs, other entities. This is a great tool that moves the needle on decentralization from centralized control, where founders have to initiate transactions, where you have to sort of be vigilant for, or are they doing the transaction when they should be? Are they not doing it too many times, etc.? This takes that control away. This is a way to give control of the economics from the founders and the centralized control to the token holders. It's a very powerful system, and I hope this helped clarify a little bit on what happens during the Treasury split, and also what the mechanisms are that we're using here. I want to thank everyone for tuning in this week. Hope you haven't minded my ramblings for the past 25 minutes or so. And I hope this could give you some insight on the system that we're using, and my take, at least, on why this is powerful, why it's needed in the space, and why others should be using it here. Want to thank both Non-Viral as well as the NONnation for tuning in. And next week, Jip will be back, and we'll have another full show for you then, where we'll cover all the latest happenings in the Ethereum's verse. And right now, I'm going to see, maybe I'll get on and finally join the Pepe train. I see that it reached new all-time highs this week. If I had thrown in money, 2 weeks ago when we talked about this first, I'd be up considerable amount. But that's neither here nor there. Everyone out there, enjoy meme season. And as always, we'll see you next week.